So we're going to talk today about redistricting, what it is generally, how it applies to Lexington. Then we're going to get a little bit into districts 1 and 12, specifically here in Lexington. To start, I'm going to introduce what Civic Lex is. So I'm the executive director of Civic Lex. We are a small civic education nonprofit organization here in Lexington that is built to help residents understand how to better engage with government and to help them understand what's really going on in the civic fabric of Lexington generally. So we are not affiliated with the city. It's something that I always have to clarify at the front end here. But we do work a lot with the city and partner a lot with the city on various things, but we are a distinct entity. And we are an education organization. We're not interested in advocacy or taking any positions on issues. So we are rigorously nonpartisan and try and make sure that we're approaching everything from a place of education. So what is redistricting? Essentially, it's the process of changing the size and shape of political districts to adjust for how communities grow and change over time. It is something that is constitutionally mandated in the US Constitution, and it happens every 10 years based on data from the decennial census. And redistricting can encompass a whole lot of things. It can encompass congressional redistricting, right, which is a federal process. There's state redistricting, and then there's local redistricting, which focuses on local governments and on school boards. And we're going to be here today to talk about redistricting as it pertains to Lexington's Urban County Council. So why redistrict, right? That's a question that we've heard from folks in some of our early presentations about redistricting. And the real reason that we redistrict is because places change over time, right? Anyone that's been in Lexington for a long time knows that Lexington looks very different than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 50 years ago, as we'll see. But redistricting allows us to sort of account for that change by redrawing these political boundaries and making sure that in an ideal process, everyone is represented appropriately and equally. And that's a really key part of redistricting generally. So it works. Who redistricts is a question that we also receive from a lot of folks. And it really depends on where you are. Here in Lexington, redistricting operates very differently than in other cities our size. So in some places, lawmakers themselves redraw their own boundaries. But in some places, there are independent redistricting commissions, and that's the case here in Lexington. And that is established in our code of ordinances that sort of established and governs how the Lexington Fayette Urban County government operates. So these legislative boundaries, when they are redrawn, there are a lot of sort of elements that have to be taken into account, right? The common interests and voting powers of communities as they currently exist, but it also has to predict how things are going to change over the next 10 years and how populations are going to grow, shrink, or move over the next 10 years, because it only happens every 10 years. So there's a lot to take into account in redistricting general. Sometimes those redrawing these boundaries can redraw boundaries. Sometimes the people that are drawing boundaries can redraw boundaries to protect their own interests. And that's something that I think a lot of folks have heard at the national level. And as we'll see here in Lexington, the process is very different. But I want to provide an example of how that can function because it's a really important aspect of understanding what redistricting is. So you can see here, there are 12 dots on the screen, right? So there's 6 green dots and 6 orange dots. Think about these dots as being different communities of interest, right? So that could be different racial groups, that could be different socioeconomic groups, and that could also be political parties, right? Especially when we get into partisan redistricting. So if you're going to try and break these 12 dots up into 4 districts, there are a lot of different ways that you can do it. And depending on how you draw those boundaries, the results can really change. So this is one way to draw those boundaries. There are if you look, there's one district that has a majority of green dots, and then 3 districts that has a majority of orange dots, right? And even with equal numbers in both of these 2 groups, you end up with 4 districts. 3 out of the 4 of them are represented by or contain majority of the orange dots. And so that's not really fair to the rest of the green dots, because they only have 1 district in which they have someone to speak for them, even though they are equal representation with the orange dots. So with that first example moving to the left, now you have this middle version, right? And this is the exact opposite. There are 3 districts with green dots that are in the majority, and 1 district with orange dots that are in the majority. And so this is, again, sort of just the inverse, where you're giving a lot of weight to the green dots and giving them more representatives that are looking to serve their interests. But the orange dots are sort of left out to 1 of the 4 districts. So then here's another way that you can draw it, right? Where there is 1 district that has 3 green dots, 1 district that has 3 orange dots, and then 1 district that is majority green dots, and 1 district that is majority orange dots. And so that's a little bit more of a fair way, depending on who you talk to, of drawing these district boundaries to ensure that there is fairly equal representation among these 2 equal groups of communities of interest, the green dots and the orange dots. So how boundaries are drawn has really big implications for a lot of our lives, right? It can have a pretty profound impact on different neighborhoods, on communities of interest, on racial groups, and more, because it really impacts our political representation. So I'm going to take a pause for a second here. And I want to just ask you to sort of drop into the chat. What is some sort of new information that you found in this process? Is this all pretty self-explanatory? Have you known about this with redistricting before? So just feel free to drop a couple comments in the chat. And there are some other folks from the Civic Lex team here that can respond and answer any questions that you might have. So how does this all impact Lexington? Well, we're going to get to the folks that are actually here to help draw these boundaries here in a minute. But we're going to start by talking about how Lexington's changed over the past 50 years and the impacts of redistricting on that change. So Lexington's rules are a little bit different than a lot of other communities. So Lexington does have an independent redistricting commission that is actually appointed by council members. So in some cities, again, council members themselves actually redraw the boundaries. But here in Lexington, each council member appoints someone to join their sort of or join the redistricting commission to represent their district. This whole process is run by the vice mayor, who is of the 3 council at large positions on city council that represent the entire city. The vice mayor is the chief vote getter, if that makes sense. They got the most votes, and so they become vice mayor. But one of the things that really sets Lexington apart in its redistricting process is that Lexington has a nonpartisan government. And this is really huge. So in a lot of times, what can happen in other communities is that it ends up becoming this partisan fight, right, between 2 political groups, often 2 political parties, that are really trying to vie for power and draw boundaries based on their political interests. Well, in Lexington, because we don't have a partisan government and council members don't, sort of wear their political parties, that sort of conflict over political power is much more diffused. So we don't really have that dynamic that a lot of other cities, even cities as close to us as Louisville, have when they're redistricting, because they do have partisan local governments where you're either a Democrat, Republican, or one of the other political parties that you might be affiliated with. So also in Lexington, as I said, each council member appoints 1 person from their district, and that person is really there to represent the interests of the district not really the interests of the council person. And that's something that's also very key. There are rules, as I'm sure we'll get to in a minute, you'll hear from our redistricting representatives, that council members are not really supposed to be talking actively with the members of the redistricting committee about what they're looking for in this process. That's really something that is discouraged in Lexington's redistricting process. So what about Lexington? Let's talk a little bit more about Lexington. Lexington also has a set of guidelines for redistricting that is adopted by the Redistricting Commission. These rules include recommendations for population count, the smallest units that could be changed. So in Lexington's case, that is voting precincts. It can affect things like not building a district so you sort of district out a political representative, and not breaking up neighborhood associations. So there are a variety of other rules. Lexington's Redistricting Commission this go around actually has 13 rules that are part of it. And all of those are available on the city's website and on our website. So if you're interested in learning what those 13 rules are, you can go visit either one of those places and find all of them. We'll have our website and the city's redistricting page at the end of this workshop. So Lexington's changed pretty significantly over the past half century. So if you look at this chart, in 1970, there were 174,000 people in Lexington. In 2020, there are 322,000 people in Lexington. And because our code of ordinances says that we should have 12 council districts, instead of adding new districts for this new population, we have to adjust our current district boundaries to incorporate those new populations. And that's a pretty significant, growth, right? We have a very linear growth rate here in Lexington. We haven't had a huge sort of population bust or a population boom. We're growing at about 30,000 people per decade, pretty consistently. So this is how Lexington's changed over time. This is what the council districts looked like in the 1970s. This was adopted by the Redistricting Commission in 1971. So you might think it looks a little bit similar to what it does now, but one of my favorite things to do is watch how this changes over time. So I'm going to cycle through them. Just going to go back and forth a little bit. So in the 1980s, you get a little bit of growth on the north side and on the south side. And you can notice some districts shifting, particularly this most southern district right here, which I believe is District 9 or District 8 at the time. Then the districts start to move a little bit. You'll also notice that the districts, which geographic areas, which number also changes a little bit in this as well. So here's the 1980s. In the 1990s, we start to see a pretty significant change. And I will give anyone points in the chat if you can name what that is. We'll reveal that exciting detail in a second. What do you think this change was from the 1980s to the 1990s? And then you'll also notice from the 1990s to the 2000s, a really significant amount of growth and change happened to the districts in the sort of southeastern part of the city. Then in the 2000s, it expands a little bit more, but there's not a really significant change, except that the change sort of happens a little bit more internally. So see, District 1 grew significantly between 2000 and 2010. So Lexington has a lot of unique characteristics that it has to weigh in redrawing boundaries. And there are three that kind of rise to the top if you talk with folks inside city government or anyone that's really concerned and interested in this process. The first one is rural and urban balance. As you all know, the USB was alluded to in the chat, but Lexington was the first city in the country to establish an urban services boundary to restrict growth out into the agrarian land. And so right now, District 12, which is the most rural district in the city and represents the giant green boundary that sort of goes around everything there. You'll notice that that's sort of for the majority of the rural land, there's only one person representing it. And there are different perspectives on that. But balancing the urban and rural sort of political power is something that is a complicating factor for our redistricting here in Lexington. Another one is communities of color, right? So Lexington is about 25% people of color, and we only have one person on city council that is a person of color. And so there's a tremendous disparity in political representation, and part of that has to do with redistricting and how we draw district boundaries. And in fact, Lexington's council used to be more diverse and has actually gotten increasingly less diverse over the past 10 to 20 years. Another big thing to take into account is university, the University of Kentucky. UK has about 29,000 students, and there's only one person that represents the University of Kentucky is really only in one council district. So, and those 29,000 people are constantly changing, and are not even, a lot of them aren't even here during the summer. And so that district changes considerably in any given year. And so these three factors all make redistricting in Lexington pretty complicated and are really unique. Some of them are very unique to Lexington and the challenges we have here. So where is Lexington in its redistricting process? Is a question you may be wondering. Why are we having this redistricting workshop? We are in the middle of the redistricting process right now. It actually got started on August 25th. That was the first redistricting committee meeting. And they really expect this process to be completely wrapped by November 3rd. We'll see if that date happens. It seems like there's the possibility to extend that. It is a very aggressive timeline, and I'm sure we'll hear from our redistricting representatives about that a little bit. But they've adopted guidelines for the process. They've heard from different departments inside the city, divisions, so the Division of Planning, GIS, which is the city's sort of mapping department, geographic information services, and then also the county clerk. They're discussing opportunities for public input, and they're discussing two potential strategies and sort of theories behind redistricting. So these two theories, one is called iterative, one is called compact. And the iterative process is on the left. If you look at that and then you go back a few slides to our current district boundaries, you'll notice that there's some changes, but it actually hasn't changed too significantly. So it is really an iterative approach, right? It's making small iterative changes to the current boundaries. The map on the right, which is another thing that the Redistricting Commission is considering, is the compact version. And this really, as you could probably tell, breaks up the rural area into a number of different districts, right? So the rural areas of Lexington, that would typically be District 12, is actually broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 districts. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that, depending on your perspective. But we've also heard in today's meeting, which we had some Civic Lex folks there, as we do in every meeting, is that there is now sort of a third potential plan, and that is iterative 2, which is a little bit less dramatic of changes than iterative 1. But we also learned some other things, that District 6 and 7 have kind of grown over this sort of threshold. They're sort of trying to add the same amount of people to each district, but District 6 and 7 is sort of outpacing the rest of the city. And District 11 is actually underpacing the rest of the city a little bit, and especially as we look over the next 10 years and the prospective growth in those districts. So it seems like there's some consideration of how to shift that representation a little bit to the east to sort of, bulk up 11 a little bit more and de-emphasize Districts 6 and 7. There's also some limitations, and really limitations isn't the right word. It's just some complications that the guidelines present, such as not, one of the guidelines is to sort of not split up a voting precinct over a major road or thoroughfare. And so there's just some sort of complications that come with that. And the last one is that the compact plan, which was this plan right here, needs a little bit more vetting. That it's actually going to be vetted by council before it would be formally considered. So based on what you know so far, what I've presented in this presentation so far, what do you think about Lexington's redistricting process? I'd ask you to just drop it in the chat. How do you feel like our process compares with other communities you might have heard of before, or with the sort of general redistricting approach that happens in a lot of places? So drop it in the chat if there are questions. Some folks from the Civic Lex team can respond. So now we're going to talk about districts 1 and 12, the two districts that we're here today to talk about more specifically. So Lexington's first council district represents the north side of downtown and many neighborhoods north of New Circle Road. Under the current working scenario, District 1 would be the most diverse council district, and it is now as well. In this sort of current working scenario, which is available on the city's redistricting data hub, I'll get to that in a little bit, there would be 25,976 residents in District 1 if the working scenario is adopted. And you'll see that 40% of that district is African American, and 17% of that district is Hispanic or Latino. So that is a very diverse district, especially when you compare with other districts in Lexington. It is incredibly diverse. Since 1972, District 1 has grown significantly beyond its original position, which used to solely be in the neighborhood that's known as the East End. So it was bounded in by North Limestone and Winchester Road, and then went up a little bit past, or right up to New Circle. District 1 went through a pretty significant expansion in 2002, adding the Lexmark campus and part of the Eastland neighborhoods, and then grew beyond New Circle Road for the first time, again in 2002. And then in 2012, it grew significantly again, adding the Marlboro Radcliffe neighborhoods and expanding past I-75/64 for the first time. So this is what District 1 has looked like over time. This is 1972. You can see it going all the way up to New Circle and being bounded by Limestone and Winchester. Then in 1982, it adds some more land on the other side of North Limestone. Then in 1992, it really fills out on both sides and goes all the way up to New Circle. Then in 2002, there's that addition of the Lexmark campus, and as well as some other neighborhoods around that. And then the current, where you see that all the way up past the Marlboro Radcliffe neighborhoods and all the way up past I-75 and 64. So this is a district that's changed pretty considerably since 1972. So I'm just going to go backwards so you can see this change a little bit more. 1972, and then 2012. So District 12 is also a district that is really interesting. So District 1 is interesting for a number of reasons. It's interesting to me because I live in it and care very deeply about my council district. But District 1 has a very diverse population and sets itself apart from other council districts because of that. District 12 is interesting in a different way, in that it is significantly larger than in landmass than any of the other districts. And it has a very strong agrarian and rural focus, whereas the rest of the districts are in urban settings or suburban settings. Lexington's 12th council district represents much of the rural areas of Lexington, in addition to some newer neighborhoods that have been added. Under the current working scenario, District 12 would be 9% African American and 7% Hispanic or Latino, so considerably less racially diverse than District 1. It has historically been the rural area of what used to be solely Fayette County before the city-county merger. Since 1972, District 12 has lost a pretty significant amount of landmass as parts of rural Fayette County have been developed. So notable changes include the removal of parts of Masterson Station in 1992, what is now Masterson Station, and then the removal from the district of much of the Hamburg commercial area in 2002, or what would become the Hamburg commercial area. So this is, it's hard to fit District 12 in one slide, so it's cut off at the top and bottom a little bit. But this is what the district looked like in 1972, then in 1982, 1992. So you can see a pretty significant growth over in the Masterson Station neighborhood. So if you guessed that earlier, you get a gold star. And then in 2002, you can see in the southeast part of the district, or of the city really, the addition or the removal from the district of a lot of land that is now Hamburg. And then the current district doesn't look too terribly different than what it did in 2002. Just some little nips and tucks here. So one of the things that we're really fortunate to have is the participation in this workshop of our two of the 15 redistricting committee members. And so I'm really grateful for Andrea Jackson from District 1 and Joe Nalia from District 12 to be joining us today to talk a little bit about what their experience has been like as a redistricting committee member. I have a couple questions for you all, but in the meantime, I would really like anyone else that has questions to drop them in the chat, and I'll toss them over to them as well. One thing I can say, if you have a question in the chat, please keep it respectful and know that Andrea and Joe we're really grateful for them for volunteering their time for us. So please take that into consideration when you're asking some questions in the chat. So Joe and Andrea, thank you all so much for being here today with us. Really appreciate it. Andrea, I'm going to start with you. I'm gonna ask both of you all the same questions, but can you just introduce yourself, talk about what your background is, and sort of what your reaction was when you were asked to be on the redistricting committee?
Absolutely. So my name is Andrea Jackson, and I've been in Lexington for almost 20 years. My background is actually in education. I worked for Fayette County Public Schools for 14 years, and more recently joined the staff of the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence, where I've been for nearly 2. And with the Pritchard Committee, I do community engagement. I giggled at your question because when I was asked to be on the redistricting committee, my answer was no. And it's time consuming and it's a lot of work, but I'm glad that I changed my mind because so far so good. It's been great. And thank you for your presentation, Richard, because how nice would that have been on the front end? I may have not said no if I had that historical context to all of this information, but it was a great presentation. Thank you for inviting us here.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, Andrea. And I'm sorry that I mispronounced your name as Andrea. I apologize.
It's okay. It's been my whole life.
One time, my mom called me Robert, and my name's Richard. So
my mom doesn't get it wrong. So,
well, you're lucky. Joe, I see you're on mute, so I might have you unmute yourself. And if you wouldn't mind, sort of answering the same questions, give us a little bit of your background and what your reaction was when you were asked to be on the redistricting committee.
Well, my background is I've been in Fayette County approximately 40 years. I was a former farm manager of Walnut Hall Stock Farm. I'm semi-retired now, and going to this new venture has been a challenge, as we had said before, but it's a learning process and I'm having a great time with it. It's a lot of work. We're dealing with it. Probably today was our best day, just simply because we got down to the meat of it, and that was encouraging for us. So I think everyone agrees with that.
Awesome. That's great. That's great to hear. So, Andrea, what are you thinking about when you're going in? Obviously, you're representing the first district. What do you feel like is in the back of your mind about the first district when you're in this process?
It's not even in the back of my mind, it's top of mind. And you hit the nail on the head that the first district is very diverse. That's what attracted my family there. I've raised 2 kids and am still raising children in this area. And my family craves diversity. I think that's the best part of District 1.
Wonderful. And Joe, for you, what do what's in the back of your mind or on the top of your mind about District 12 when you're in this process? What are you thinking about your district?
Well, I think you described it probably better than I. I think we have to be very, very careful how we deal with District 12. It has always been sort of, as the thing grew, District 12 sunk, but we also have to appreciate what all that stands for. The agricultural community in this county is our ace in the hole, in my view. I think it has a lot to do with the success of this county.
Awesome. Yeah, both of you all, we were talking in our office earlier about this sort of interesting pairing of districts 1 and 12 for this workshop. While it was a little unintentional, is also, we aren't that clever, but it was a really interesting when we were sort of going through and talking through today's workshop to be considering these two districts together. What has been the most sort of surprising thing? And Joe, I'll start with you, and then Andrea, I'll come back to you. What has been the most surprising thing so far? I know you all have only had 3 meetings, but I'm sure there have been a lot of surprises in those 3 meetings. But Joe, what do you think you've been the most surprised about in this process?
Well, I think the most comforting and surprising thing for me is to understand that we do have this many people involved with these districts. And I think, certainly I get the impression that we work very well and we listen to what we should be doing rather than just saying, well, District 12 has to be dealt with a different way. Well, or 1 or anything else. So I think the amount of support we get from the people that come in and help us, I think that's encouraging. And it is hard work, but I will also say that it's easier on everyone when you can sit down and have a great discussion about what we ought to be doing.
Absolutely. Andrea, what about you? What's been the most surprising thing for you?
It's been really surprising for me to see the areas that are projected for growth. I think that it's a given that the Hamburg area has started growing some years ago. We have new schools in that area, but it's projected to continue to grow, as well as out the Georgetown Road corridor. So just highlighting areas that we need to know that are projected to grow in this city. But those were some notes that I took almost immediately, because that brings so many things to mind. When areas are expected to be more populated, that means we need resources, right? We need more schools, we need grocery stores, that kind of thing. So I was excited to see those areas mapped out for us.
Awesome. Yeah, it seems like I mean, I haven't been to many of the committee meetings, but our staff has been, and it seems like the city is providing you all with a lot of resources in this process. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is, that a lot of times people think that these districts are sort of drawn very quickly, but there's actually a lot of information that goes into these decisions. This is a question for either of you, or if neither of you want to answer, that's fine as well. But what do you see as the sort of the most difficult decisions that are going to be part of this over the next couple months? or they'll all be easy choices.
Oh, that's a tough one. I think the things that are put for us when we come into this, and I honestly believe we all try to do the same things, and the diversification of what we're challenged with, trying to keep it as near as we can to being what we think will work. That's a really tough thing to do. And you don't, in my view, we don't want to move too much around without accomplishing what we're trying to do. And that is a real, for me anyway, that's a challenge. And I think today we had our groups, as we moved the maps around, we thought, well, that might work, but then you have to worry about whatever surrounds that particular place, and so that's a challenge for me. It is anyway.
Yeah. What about for you, Andrea?
I'll echo Joe. My response was going to be adding or taking away. It instantly became kind of territorial, like, wait a minute, that's my district. So I think that just the having the flexibility of knowing what's best for districts and the give and take of the process and sharing that with other members on the commission.
Yeah. Yeah, you all have a very complex and complicated few months in front of you all. And I think it's really important for everyone that's watching this to understand that, right, you all are volunteers coming in to do this work. And, the city is providing assistance and data and that, but it really is residents that are redrawing these boundaries and making these decisions. And I think we can't thank you enough for the service that you're putting in to do this. It really is, I know, a big time commitment. So I would just ask if anyone has any other questions that they would like Andrea or Joe to answer, to drop them in the chat. Now, because we're ending running up on the end of my questions, I have one more that's going to be a really hard one for both of you all. What is your favorite? What's your favorite place in your district? And Andrea, you made a dramatic reaction. So Joe, I'll start with you, and then we'll come to Andrea. Joe, what's your favorite place in District 12?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would have to say where I live. I mean, it's the problem with that question you have. It could take you a half a day to find all the places that I might like. So, but being in this setting is what I like, and it's why I enjoy where I am. So yeah, I guess that's, and close to the horse park and all that. So it's good. Yeah, like it.
Awesome. Andrea, sorry. I have a dear friend named Andrea, and so I'm just so used to doing that. Andrea, what about you? What's your favorite place in District 1?
So I live in the Marlboro Radcliffe area, and we are big patrons of Marlboro Park. It's right in the neighborhood. We rent the shelter. My kids play there. We walk dogs there. And it's probably, if not part of my daily routine, definitely part of my weekly routine. I have tons of favorites, but that comes immediately to mind. But we have a big district that, touches into downtown and stretches out towards the rural parts of the urban service area. So there's a lot, and I have a lot of favorite places. And of course, I dip into other people's districts too, but my answer would be Marlboro Park.
Awesome. Yeah, as a District 1, fellow District 1 resident, my favorite place is Castlewood Park. So I'm right there with you. It's just a block away from my house. So here's a question in the chat. Are there any of the guidelines that you're particularly concerned, of those 13 guidelines, that you're particularly concerned about upholding? Or are they all equally important to you?
I personally don't have one that I think about all the time, but again, we go back to the same issue. When we have the set of guidelines that we go by, there are lots of things that we try to look at. I think it's not fair to say we're going to have them all the way they need to be. I think it's going to be very, very hard for us to do everything as the guidelines state. I think we try, but I think that's virtually an impossible thing to do.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough.
Yeah. Andrea, what about you?
I don't have any that are concerning. We were given guiding principles through this process, and we were given some language around what shall happen through this process and what could happen through this process, right? And I think that language is beneficial when you're making decisions like this. It's the guidance that we need to be informed, and I don't have any that are concerning. All of them are quite appropriate, and really kind of protect a lot of the integrity that districts already have.
Yeah. Again, it is, you all have an enormous task in front of you. So we can't, I think, speaking for everyone in the chat and myself, that, thank you so much for your service and dedication to this. We are gonna wrap things up unless anyone else has any questions in the chat. I'm gonna share my screen for one more second. So for more information on redistricting here in Lexington, there are two really great resources. There's our website, civiclex.org. We have a whole page on Lexington's redistricting process. And the city of Lexington also has a page at lexingtonky.gov/redistricting-Lexington. And both of those are great places that you can go to find out information about what's going on. We also have a redistricting newsletter. One will go out this Friday with all of the details we shared in this presentation, as well as a link to this video. And then we attend all of the meetings and take notes and share those out as well. So those will be going out through that. You can sign up at civiclex.org. If you have any other questions about CivicLex or anything, you can reach out to me at richard@civiclex.org or info@civiclex.org, and that will hit our whole staff. There is one more question that came up in the chat, and it seems like it should be an easy one. Are you all personally glad that redistricting in Lexington does not involve political parties?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Nothing else needs to be said about that. Absolutely. Yes.
Andrea, do you agree with that?
Yes, I'm sorry. I responded, yes, I am glad.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a really great night. And thank you all for joining us on a Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. on Zoom. I know it takes a lot to come out to something too. So thank you all so much, and have a great night.